Hi everyone, looks like we still got a few people joining in, so I'll give them just another minute and then we'll get started. All right. Hi everybody. So my name is Alex Swindler and I'm a software engineer with the Commercial Buildings Research Group at the National Renewable Energy Lab here in Golden, Colorado. And I've been working on the front and back end code of the SEED project for the last 5 years or so. And I've been lucky to see it grow into a robust, feature-rich platform for aggregating and managing data. So this presentation is going to be focused on some of the advanced features of SEED. If you were able to see Robin's presentation from about 3 weeks ago, she showed off most of the general functionality and high-level features as far as importing data, managing the data, and kind of the fundamentals around the separations of property and tax lots with regards to how we're managing that data. So this training webinar is going to build on Robin's demo with a bit more hands-on interaction and less PowerPoint slides. So most of what I'm going to demonstrate assumes that you're already somewhat familiar with SEED, but it's not a prerequisite. We're mostly going to be looking at the advanced features like GIS, interval data, importing green button, BuildingSync, importing from Portfolio Manager, etc. So for this demo, I'm going to be using the latest code on the SEED develop branch. So it has all of the current functionality, but potentially also bugs since it's under active development. And as we go along, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box and we'll respond to that after the presentation. So these are the high-level topics that we're going to be looking at today, starting out with the API usage. So this is all of the functionality within SEED is served through the API, the user interface, back-end integration, everything. Then we're going to go into uploading data from your local computer or importing directly from Portfolio Manager. And this includes some of the tricks that we're using to handle things like zip codes or BuildingSync information, meter data, green button, ESPM, geocoding data using the MapQuest API, importing building footprints, unique building IDs, visualizing those building IDs on a map, showing interval data, and then some of it's just going to be around how you manage your organization within SEED as far as configuring your units, using some of the advanced features on the inventory list view, exporting your data, and then hopefully, if we've got time for it, matching, merging, pairing, linking. So it's a little ambitious, but we'll see what we can get through. All right, let's jump in. So here's the SEED homepage. A good place to start if you're interested in understanding more about the API and how all the data is served to the interface is to first head to the developer tab on your user profile. So since I'm running this locally, fortunately nobody can steal my API key and use it to mess with data that I have access to, fortunately. So, or I could just generate a new one. But the nice thing is every time there's a new user account within SEED, you're automatically generated an API key. And this allows you to access any of the functionality within SEED. So we've got a basic example right here, just so you can understand how you might use this. And there's a few different ways to use the API key. In this example, we're going to use basic authentication. So it's effectively a trick with curl to pass in your username and the API key, and it's going to convert it into base 64. So this is a Linux syntax. So at least since I'm on Windows, I'm going to use git bash just to demonstrate how that works. So making this call, we're able to return the version number of seed and the current get SHA, which is just the most recent commit that I'm using to serve this. And you can see that exact same functionality if you visit the About page. So it's using that same API call to get the data to show for this screen. Now I'm going to copy my API key. If we go to the Swagger page where all the API documentation is shown, you can see the various versions of the API as we've developed them and deprecated them. And we are currently in the process of building out version 3 of the API. So this is going to end up being the most comprehensive and consistent version of the API so far. And since I'm already logged in, I'm already able to use Swagger. And the way you would use this, it's easiest to go with like a get method to start, just because I don't have to pass a whole lot of data in. I already know my organization ID is 2, so I'm just going to retrieve all of the data sets for my organization. And then here in the response body, we can see the entire API response. So this is exactly what the UI is using and third-party libraries are using to interface with Seed. Now, since this is just a standard request, since I'm already logged in, it's not doing anything special because it's using my browser cookies to authenticate. So if you were to use the API token, you can click on Authorize, put in your username, and then paste the API token. And the next time you make the request, you'll see that it passed in authentication basic here with that base 64 string that I mentioned earlier. So we get the exact same data out, but this is the way to do it if you don't already have cookies set up like in your browser. So this is a good place to start exploring if you want to understand how to retrieve or manipulate data within Seed and automate it. The Seed API has been used for all sorts of things. Interface for like Python libraries like PySeed, for instance, as well as third-party integration with Salesforce and other tools for managing your building stock and compliance data. So next, we're going to start looking at uploading and importing some of these really customized formats beyond just basic spreadsheets and CSVs. So we're going to head to the data set screen within Seed. I've already got a data set created. There's nothing in it at the moment. So the first thing I want to show, I'm going to upload a spreadsheet. You can choose which cycle your data is going into. So it's important to remember if it always defaults to the newest one. So I'm going to upload just a file of zip codes. Now, the reason this one's kind of interesting is because if you have an Excel file with zip codes in it, oftentimes you might notice that it's using a special formatting, which is kind of inconvenient. It knows that it's a zip code, so it's prepending zeros to it. But if you look at the raw value, it might only be 3 or 4 digits long. So that can be a problem when you're importing it. So Seed is smart enough to recognize when we map data to a postal code that it should always be 5 digits. You can see right here the raw data, we've got between 3 and 4 digits for most of these. So the first thing you want to do is choose your mapping fields. So this is something that Robin demonstrated in her presentation 3 weeks ago. So what I did, I just simplified it by clicking copy data file headers directly into Seed headers because I already know that the Excel headers that I had are convenient. So we've got postal code, lat long, city, state, and county. And I'm going to cheat for a moment. I'm just going to make up a new header called zip. And then let's see, since I know that the counties are unique, I'm going to make this one of my custom mapping fields. So this is the field that it's going to look for uniqueness on. Now you'll see that since I chose just a randomly named column for my zip codes, they just came in as the raw values, and that's not what we want to see. So if I go back, fix that, change it to postal code, which is what Seed recognizes. Now you can see we've got prepended zeros to all of the postal codes as expected. And we can finish the mapping process. Now, one of the convenient things about Seed is that if you map to the latitude and longitude fields, it knows that it doesn't have to perform any geocoding. You've already told it that this is precisely where the address is located. So you can see that the geocoding results show that it was successful because we've already passed in all of the data that's necessary. So when you first come to the inventory list view, you're going to have a lot of columns generally. So they're pretty far spread out. One of the most convenient features of Seed, if you click the Actions dropdown on the inventory list view, and then click Only Show Populated Columns, it will pull all of the data, check every single column to see if it's not empty, and then leave that as part of your settings profile. So I'm just going to make a new profile called Populated. So it found 11 columns. And now we can conveniently see everything all on the screen at once, including our 0 prepended zip codes. We also have a map view, which is convenient. So because we have the latitude and longitude values, you can see all of those 7 locations that I had selected, including 4 that are clustered in New England area, until you zoom in, and then they'll automatically space out. And we'll come back to this screen because there's a lot more to show here. Right now, since we only have latitude and longitude, we're only seeing this building points icon. There's obviously quite a few others here that you can enable. So let's see, is there anything else I wanted to show on that? Nope. All right. So I'm going to delete this data for now. And it's going to remember my settings profile. So it's going to keep these same columns, but you can have multiple settings profiles just depending on which columns you're looking to see. So you might have a settings profile for a 2018 compliance year or 2019 that might be different. It's up to you. And you can go to the list settings view to customize this. You can also pin the columns and rearrange them in any order you see fit. So one thing I want to show before we go any farther are your organization settings. So this is important for all of the import processes and things like that. So units is one of the most important features of your organization setting because this is how it's going to be presenting the values to you. When you import the data, if it's a known field with units, for instance, gross floor area, you have the option of selecting, say, square feet or square meters during the import process. The data is automatically converted to IP units when it's stored in the Seed database. But then whatever preference you have here for your organization is what conversion is going to take place when you see the values on the inventory view or when you're using the API. And you also have the option of converting some units as well. And then we also have the MapQuest API, and this is something that I will be changing after the call, of course, but this is if you want geocoding enabled, where you pass in, say you have a file with address, city, state, and zip code. As long as you have a MapQuest API key set for your organization, geocoding will happen, and it will use the MapQuest API to look up the latitude and longitude using MapQuest's best guess of where that address is located. So I'll show you that here in a moment. Going through some of these organization settings, there's quite a bit of power here on the column settings screen. So since I just mentioned geocoding, you have the option of selecting which fields you map to. that you want to be ordered when that data is sent to MapQuest to look up the latitude and longitude. So by default, you've got these 5 selected: address line 1, line 2, city, state, zip code. On the far right, we have match criteria, and this is also critically important, particularly if you decide to change it later. So it's the kind of thing you want to set up when you first create your organization within Seed, ideally. So these are the 4 default fields. We can sort them to 4 default fields that at least one of them must exist when you map your data. So right now we've got PM property ID, UBID, custom ID 1, and address line 1. There's a bunch of other very helpful columns as well, such as merge protection and recognize empty, all of which is documented here on the page because it can get rather complicated. But something like merge protection will make sure that newer data cannot overwrite older data if you have selected that column to be protected. And then lastly, here on the column mappings organization screen, we have a number of column mappings we can choose from, presets that make it really convenient when you're importing your data, such that if you probably only have a couple formats that you're really importing regularly, say like Portfolio Manager and maybe another one. This way, you can predefine how you want your Excel or CSV files to be mapped, and then immediately load in that preset. And the way this is a new feature, because the way Seed used to work was that the most recent mapping that you used for a header from your Excel file, say, would always override any past preferences that you had. So if you were switching between formats often, it could be quite tedious to go through and correct this every time you were mapping a new file. All right, so let's look at a geocoding example. I'm going to delete my zip code data, add a new file. And just to show you what's in here first, just a very basic file, address, city, state, zip code. We've got the White House, NREL, Apple, and Google. So since I mentioned those mapping presets, it will always be empty by default when you load the file. And then you can decide if you want to choose a preset or if you want to just go with the headers that were in your file already. So since this is already formatted, I'm going to use the headers for my file. And because we have that MapQuest API key, we can see the geocoding results that it attempted to pull, and we can see that 3 of them were successful, 1 was not. And when we go to the property view, we can find out what it thought. So Mountain View, Google's Googleplex, came back with a low confidence for the address. And that's because presumably Google's Googleplex is a gigantic campus, so it may not have been able to pinpoint the exact location of 1600, couldn't even tell you the address. See, this is why we're going to use only show populated columns. There we go, 1600 Amphitheater Parkway. Now, you can edit the data and refine it, and then optionally geocode selected and run it again if you had if you've improved it to a point that you expect the geocoding to succeed. That way you don't have to worry about being stuck with a certain geocoding confidence or the lack of a latitude and longitude because it didn't import properly the first time. But since this address is already correct, I'm not going to rerun the geocoding for it. But again, we can go to the map view and then find all 4 of those locations on the map. All right. So now I'm going to delete my records again, just to clean it up. Well, and one thing worth showing, when you select these records, you always have the option of exporting, merging, and a variety of other things, including manually running data quality checking. In this case, let's just try exporting selected. So you can choose from a variety of formats, including GeoJSON, which we'll be coming back to. But since we imported these just from a very basic Excel file and then geocoding occurred, if we wanted to export GeoJSON, wait for that to open. There we go. So now we have created a GeoJSON file directly from that very basic Excel file. So we've got latitude and longitude, all these tons of details that were retrieved from MapQuest that we didn't have before. But as expected, if you wanted to export just a CSV, for instance, that's simple too. And it comes with all of the new data in terms of when the record was created within seed, updated within seed, any labels that you may have applied while you were in seed, notes that you may have created, and then these new columns as well, so latitude, longitude. So I'm going to delete these records. And now we're going to do something a little more interesting. Instead of uploading a file, we're going to import a file directly from Energy Star Portfolio Manager. So in the past, you could always download a file from Portfolio Manager and then bring it into seed. But we've tried to automate that process as much as possible. So when you come to this screen, you can put in your Portfolio Manager username and password. Click Get Report Templates. It will fetch all of the reports available to you within Portfolio Manager. And we're going to go with this Seed City benchmarking report. All right, just like that, it was able to pull in all of the data from that report. And at this point, you can now apply your mappings. You can even choose your Portfolio Manager defaults if you had those created, which I don't. So I'm just going to put these in really quickly. Now that I've created this, we can make a new one called PM import. And then we can use this the same preset in the future when we import from Portfolio Manager. So we map the data, we can review it, make sure everything looks right. It's only 4 rows, so it's a pretty small report. And then we can save the mappings and match against existing data. All right. Now, let's see. Yeah, so geocoding wasn't very successful on these, so we would probably want to clean that up and make sure they were accurate, but we're not going to do that right now. So one thing worth showing, some of the advanced features here on the inventory list view. So I'm going to show populated columns again. One of the coolest features we have is natural sorting on every column. So normally this column would probably be sorted 1, 2, 3, 16, 15, 120,000, 243, and then 555 if this were just sorting alphabetically. But Seed understands the logical separation of numbers and letters and is able to sort logically based on this on the data that you've got, and that works for all of these columns. Now you can also, I think Robin showed some of the filtering last time. So you could just anything. You can do like a contain filter. So in this case, I'm just typing sport, and it's searching for rows that contain sport. It's case insensitive, but there's a great deal of power here in the filtering that isn't obvious right away. So if you were to say put an equal sign in front and then say quote quote or 1, 2, 3. Actually, let me see what it was. Sports Avenue. Wow, it's not very good. In general, you can do an exact match of the row that you're looking at, or search for non-empty fields, or search for, say, false, true. Or if you have a date, there's a significant amount of date filtering. So you could say greater than 2019. Now, if we change that to greater than 2020, then nothing happens because all of these dates are in 2020. Greater than or equal to, though, we'll find them all. And you can continue that filter further and say May 19th or 20th, and it won't find them. So that's kind of handy. The syntax is documented in the repo, but it's something that we'll probably end up including in here just for convenience. And when you click on the little eye symbol next to one of the records, it takes you to the detail view of that record. And here you can edit any of the data. So if you did want to improve your geocoding, this is where you might come in and modify the address, maybe adding address line 2 to make it more specific. Or, if my city isn't a real city, you're probably not going to get very good results. So this is where you can come in, make those changes. And you can see there's certain fields that you're not allowed to edit. For instance, geocoding confidence, since that's a value that comes back from MapQuest. So you're kind of protected from messing with the wrong data. And as you scroll down, you'll find a lot more information about your record, most of which doesn't come in by default because a lot of this is depends on other import formats, such as green button and a few other things. Let's see, BuildingSync. So we'll show that next. While we're on this page, we can do the exact same thing we were doing on the list view, only show populated columns. We can make a new column profile specific to the detail view. And we get the same kind of result where we only see the data that we're interested in because it exists. All right, so let's see, let's add a green button file. I'll go back into that same record. And if we go to the meter page, so there's no meter data yet. And we'll show some of this functionality more in a bit, but if we just click on upload green button data, and we're just gonna put in my same data set, I'm going to go to my green button directory and grab a green button file. And we get a preview before we confirm that we want to add it. So now we've imported just a basic amount of green button data. It's 15 minutes apart. So there's not a whole lot here, but it just kind of exemplifies that it supports green button, and it's a simple process of adding this to any record if you've already got the data. So right now we're showing the exact intervals. So we've got obviously a 15-minute interval here, but you can aggregate that up to a month level or a year level. And you can also filter by scenarios if scenarios exist. And we'll be coming back to that as well. You can also turn on and off specific meters and click away, lose focus to refresh. That way you can see exactly which records you're interested in. And then of course the same kind of filtering that you've come to expect. So let's see. Delete my data sets. Clear out my records. All right, so now we're gonna look at some of the building footprint import process. So just to give you some background on GeoJSON. So geojson.io is a good website just to explore the functionality of GeoJSON and kind of visualize what your files look like. JSON is not really human readable when it has a bunch of coordinates, so it's not exactly useful. This is a large GeoJSON file that represents the entire NREL campus. And as you can see, it's just a grouping of properties and details about each property, and then coordinates that create a polygon representing that footprint. So not very useful in its current form. But if we take that GeoJSON file, drop it onto geojson.io, you can see everything that exists in the file, all of the buildings. You can click on it. You can even see all of the metadata associated with it. So this is everything that's in this file. You can see that this is just a community photovoltaic array rather than an actual building. But the point is that GeoJSON is able to contain all of this data and metadata in a really complex way. And we can import that into Seed. So we can add a data file, upload a GeoJSON file, and then you can go through the normal process of mapping your data, importing it, and bringing it all into your inventory list view. So what's cool about this is that you've started with a single JSON file, and Seed was able to read it and break it out into all of these individual records so that you can make a property from each record inside that JSON file. And there's also a process for bringing in those building footprints, and we're currently working on adding that for GeoJSON files. So instead of mapping this, I'm going to bring that file in now. So I'm going to show you what that looks like before we do that. So this is just a standard spreadsheet, but if you look at it, it's got a lot of totally incomprehensible polygons here in latitude, longitude format, in a format called WKT. So we've got just polygon after polygon representing these multiple 7 properties. So I'm going to add this file. And the trick to help Seed understand that this is not just a standard CSV is in how you map the data. So you definitely want to make sure that when you map this WKT format, you're using the property footprint mapping. And we've also got the UBIDs in here as well for the unique building IDs. So let's go ahead and import that. All right, I'm going to show the populated columns again. Great. So now it still looks exactly the same as it did in the spreadsheet, but one of the cool features of Seed, because it understands what these polygons are, you can hover over them and get a preview of what that polygon looks like. And these can be pretty complicated polygons, including concave, convex, donuts, anything that can be represented in the WKT format. And if we go to the map view, we can actually see all of those footprint locations on the map here. So this is where the map view starts to get a little more interesting because we have the UBIDs in this data. If we zoom out, you can see the hexagonal binning of all of the data. You can see these bounding boxes that represent the entire building rectangle, the containing rectangle. And then you have the UBID centroid in the very center. So that's kind of handy. Let's see. So one of the things we're looking to adding into Seed, there's a number of open source footprint databases out there now, including the Microsoft building footprints. So these are just on GitHub, and they take up tens of gigabytes of data. We're looking at incorporating those into Seed so that we can kind of automate this process of pairing a building footprint with your raw data as it's imported. Just so the same way that we are looking up latitude and longitude, or even decoding these based on a UBID, we'd be able to find a footprint that matches based on an address. So even the latitude and longitude here, that didn't come in from the import file. That was decoded using the universal building ID. And say that you had already imported data in the past, and you had mapped this UBID field, but it was before we added UBID decoding. You could then just select the rows you care about, go to the Actions menu, and decode UBID for selected. Now, it's going to warn you because it understands that you already have done this process. The latitude and longitude exists. You can continue to do it anyway, but if you didn't have latitude and longitude, this would be a good way to decode that and add that data to your records. Let's see. All right, so let's look at some of the GIS functionality now. So I'm going to delete selected. Go back to my data set, delete my data file. And we've already looked at most of the GIS functionality, but let's look at this covered building sample file. Now, one thing worth mentioning, the reason we're able to do all of this functionality with interval data and geocoding and GIS functionality and latitude, longitude is because we've added a couple extensions to the Postgres database. So we're using the timescale DB extension to manage the interval data. So Postgres by itself is just a relational database, but these extensions allow you to augment it and add new functionality. So we're able to store interval data at any frequency, and then we can just aggregate it based on your preferences. And then, of course, the PostGIS extension is what we're using to manage like the latitude, longitude, geocoding, and searching functionality. Let's see if I already have a preset. Here's a preset. Good. So I've already got gross floor area mapped to square feet. So I've got my units selected, and we can go ahead and import this file. So this file also has UBIDs already in it, which is very convenient. Since it's got 512 records, it's taking a little longer to process because it's checking to make sure that there aren't any duplicates or that it might have multiple matches within the same file or against the existing data. All right, and since it already had the UBIDs, it was able to use the pre-populated latitude and longitude. So here's all 512 of our new records. We can again go to the map view and see all of them. Let's see where this is. Near Chicago. So as you zoom out, again, this hexagonal binning, we can see that all of the records are combined just based on your resolution. But you can zoom in and see all of these tiny records overlaid on top of the map. So you can see the building outline and the centroid of the UBIDs. So it's just a really convenient way to understand visually what your data looks like. All right, so let's look at interval data and meter data. I know we're covering a lot of ground, so hopefully we're not moving too fast, but I'm going to try to get it all in. So this time we're going to upload a portfolio manager file that contains interval data and meters. So the first thing we need to do, upload the portfolio manager records just so that they already exist within Seed, and then we can upload the meter data as a second file. By the way, most of the files that I'm using here to upload, the vast majority of these are already in the Seed repository. So none of them are proprietary, and you can find them if you're looking to try to do the same imports. So I'm going to upload this portfolio manager sample file. And I'm going to use a portfolio manager preset that I've already configured. So everything looks good. All right, save mappings. And I think since we've already got 512 records in the inventory, it's going to take a little bit longer to compare as well. One other thing worth noting, I'm using a special setting on my computer, which is why the progress bar doesn't move until the very end. So in practice, you won't see that on the Seed website. You'll actually see the progress bar moving along. So let's view our data. And now that we've got the PM property IDs added in here, we can add our meter data. So I'm going to search for that column, pin that. So now I've pinned the PM property ID here in the first column. So let's upload the meter file. For this, we're going to use a separate button. It's import portfolio manager data, or actually, sorry, it's upload portfolio manager meter usage. I'm going to grab my meter usage file, and we get a preview of the data before we commit to it. I'm going to confirm that. And now it's important to note that this meter data only applies to 2 PM property IDs. So I'm going to be careful when I click the right one to view that meter data. So we can see that we were able to pull in, and if I sort by this, pull in electrical and natural gas meter data for both of these properties. If I go back to my inventory view, I'm going to filter for one of them. And then we can go to the meter tab. And here is the data that we just imported. So we are looking at the exact intervals right now, which is a 1 month interval. So if we were to change this to a month aggregation, nothing would change. But if we choose year instead, then we see 2016. And all of the data is aggregated for the year. So you can, this again, but before we can select which meters we are interested in seeing, and you can turn them on and off. And then, let's see. And if you have scenarios, which we don't in this file, you would also see a scenario drop down here so that you could choose that. But I think we'll see that with the BuildingSync file that we tried next. So let's clear out our records and upload a BuildingSync file. And delete my data files, add a new one. And we're going to go with upload BuildingSync data this time. So for this, I'm going to start with this file called ex1. This one does not have meter data. It's just standard BuildingSync. And it's able to import all of these, and it maps automatically. So there's nothing for us to do here. It'll even choose a default measurement unit if you don't select one, but I'm going to go with square feet. All right, so now we've imported one record from a BuildingSync file. And if we go look at this data, go to meter view. Actually, let's from this view here on the property detail screen. So we have a number of options, including update with BuildingSync. So this just lets you basically add a new set of data on top of your existing data if you wanted to. And in this case, I'm just going to pick the other file just for fun. So this is a Bricker workflow file, but it does have meter data. So now we were able to add that in. You can see the addresses are slightly different, but it's not a big deal because I'm not looking for consistency at the moment. And if we go to the meter page, now we can see the meters and the scenarios as well. So we've got, looks like a year's worth of monthly data. Yep. So you filter by months and it will aggregate, renaming it to a clean month name or again to the year. Let's go to exact. And we'll switch to scenario mode. So this is basically just gives you a grouping of these meters, which can be convenient. So we could choose to view only the baseline, and then we can see electric and natural gas baseline scenarios, or maybe LED only. But it's arbitrary what you want to view, and it's convenient just to be able to have these different options to select and decide what you want to filter down by. And then let's see what else I had. Got a lot of test files. So let's look at linking now. So it's probably a good idea to describe what this is doing before we get into it, because I think we've covered everything else in this directory at this point. So the idea with linking, this has been an issue with Seed for a long time that we finally tackled within the last year, and that's that as you upload your compliance data year after year, typically you've got the same records, even with small changes, year after year, but there was no way in Seed for it to understand the relationship between those records over time. You would have to just change the cycle and then filter looking for the record that you were interested in. So what we've done is we've added the ability to look across cycles and effectively match the data that based on the criteria that you select and say, okay, this is the same property for years 2017, 18, and 19, or something like that. And you can do the same thing with tax lots as well. So let me clear out my records. And I've already got 2 cycles created. I haven't populated 2018 yet, so we'll do that next. And since we were looking at the organization page earlier, it's probably worth revisiting that now. Back on the column mapping screen, column settings, when we were looking at match criteria, this is the same criteria that it's going to be looking for to link that data across the cycles. And I believe there's a requirement that they all have to be identical. So you might just want to use just one of these. So I might turn this off just to be address line 1. Now it's going to warn you, like I mentioned, when you make changes to your matching criteria. So I'm going to acknowledge that. When you make changes to your matching criteria, it will reevaluate all of your records, and if it can combine existing records based on your new selections, it will do that. That's kind of why it's warning you, because it wants to make sure you are confident with the change that you're making. And since I don't have any data right now, I'm not at any risk. So let's upload 2018. And just to give you an idea what's in these files, I just threw these together right before the demonstration, so they're pretty basic. We've just got 4 columns: jurisdiction, tax lot, address, city, and number of buildings. So since you just saw that we made the address line 1 field the only matching record, it should be looking for this data as it links across cycles. And the difference between these 2 files that I created, all I did was modify number of buildings just for fun. So they would be slightly different. So let's open and make sure I've got the right cycle. Yep, 2018. All right, so let's map this. I'm going to put jurisdiction tax lot ID on the tax lot table. Probably one thing worth noting, if you see me typing these in, you'll notice I get autocomplete, basically, closest match to what I've typed. You can see that some rows are green and some rows are white. The green rows are the rows that are defaults within seed. So these are the ones that it kind of expects you to map to generally, just for consistency. So that's why I'm kind of looking for number of buildings. I'm searching for the building count row. All right, I'm gonna map, you know what, let's make a preset since we know we're doing this twice. Call this linking. Oops. And map my data. All right, and since we chose one column on the tax lot table, you can see now that we have tax lot data in addition to the properties. Save that. All right, so now let's go view it, just make sure. So here we can see our 2018 data. We've got 9 properties and 8 tax lots. And if we toggle to 2019, there's nothing in here yet. So there's no chance for any linking at this time. Let's go add the other file. And as you can see, I was careless and I didn't make sure that I was using the right cycle first. So we're on 2019. Select my 2019 file. Let's go with that same mapping. Yep, and as expected, yeah, the building count, they're all just 1 increment higher for the ones that had that value. Save my data. And then we get our results. So let's go look at our data. So I think it should have already linked. If we go to this cross cycles tab, maybe not. Or maybe I have to turn these on. There we go. Yep, so it has already linked the data just on import. So it has recognized that because the address line 1 field that we had selected as our matching criteria, it found all of these records that were non-empty existed across 2 cycles. So this view lets us see all of the cycles that this property exists within. So that's a really convenient way to get an idea of your data over time. Now, if you have a huge amount of data, this page might take a while to load, so it's probably a good idea to filter your criteria so that you're only looking at what you're interested in. So we could say like 39929, put in the address, and then expand this out to see all of the cycles that our record exists within. We can look at tax lots too. So same thing, all the tax lots were identical across all cycles, so they all ended up having linking across 2 cycles. So there's a lot of verbs within C that all maybe sound kind of familiar. We've got merging, matching, pairing, linking. So it's kind of important to understand what those all mean. So merging is the first, actually mapping is the first step. And mapping, as you've seen many times now, you are taking your raw headers from your import file and kind of deciding on a standard name for them so that Seed can understand how to compare that data to all your other records. Then you have merging, and that's where it takes your matching criteria, address line 1 in this case, and looks for any other records with the same address line 1 and merges those records together so that you have a history of that record within a single cycle over time. Then you have, so I think that was merging. Matching is kind of the same thing, but merging, if you come back here, you have the option of manually merging records if you so choose, and you get a preview of what that result might look like. And you're able to reorganize the records you want to merge and restructure how it's going to turn out in the end. And then lastly, the linking, which we just saw, and pairing. So pairing lets you decide what tax lot is going to be paired with what property. and you can get to that from the data set screen. So I think Robin may have showed just a little bit of this, but since we have 9 properties and 8 tax lots, and I think only one of them is unpaired, we can I think drag and drop and create that pairing. So this just allows you to associate tax lots with properties and filter those records, or completely disassociate them if you wanted to. And it's all based on cycle too, so you can just toggle a cycle and do the same thing. And if you go to the pairing settings, kind of the same thing we've seen across the other views within Seed as far as the inventory list and inventory detail views. You have the option of choosing which columns you're filtering against, or that you're looking at to compare your records in deciding how you want to pair them. And since I don't have a whole lot of data in either PM property ID or custom ID columns, those are less than ideal for the data I'm working with right now. So that covers almost everything. I think the last few things is kind of just, exporting, which we've already looked at a little bit. We have export selected, and you can do a CSV, or you can go straight to an Excel file, GeoJSON. There's even a menu on the grid itself, so you can export all data, visible data, selected data, and use Excel formats as well. So there's a few more options there. So in general, Seed is pretty comprehensive in terms of what it's able to understand, what you can import, between Green Button, BuildingSync, Portfolio Manager, building footprints, GeoJSON, the list goes on and on. Even these kind of obscure polygon formats like WKT, it's just really an all-in-one solution. So I think that probably concludes everything I wanted to demonstrate today. I know there's quite a lot, so hopefully you can download this and revisit it if you're looking to try out one of these different functionalities. So with that, I will thank everyone for their time today, because I know this was an intense hour, but yeah, hopefully you're able to learn a lot and understand more about Seed and get more interested in the project just based on some of the power that Seed brings to the table. So that's it. Thank you for attending. Take care.